Good morning, church. In today's first reading from Isaiah, chapter 55, verses 1 to 3, he says that God offers us everything we could wish and asks for nothing in return. Do you believe that? Let me read the passage. Isaiah 55, verses 1 to 3. Thus says the Lord, all you who are thirsty, come to the water. You who have no money, come, receive grain and eat. Come without paying and without cost. Drink wine and milk. Why spend your money for what is not bread, your wages for what fails to satisfy? Heed me, and you shall eat well. You shall delight in rich fare. Come to me heedfully. Listen that you may have life. I will renew you with the everlasting covenant, the benefits assured to David. A priest friend of mine attended a family gathering, and eventually the mother called the family into the house for the meal. As he walked up to the steps, there was a little girl struggling with her chair. And so without thinking, he simply took the chair and placed it on the veranda. The girl looked at him, walked up the steps, took the chair, walked back down the steps, and then turned around to struggle with the chair herself. I'm reminded of this story when I was taken by ambulance last Tuesday to the hospital. The admitting nurse asked me if I had a living will and if I wanted to be resuscitated. She took me off guard with the question, and so I took a long time to answer. Eventually, she simply ticked off a box and continued with the next question. The reason it took me a long time to answer was because I had a dialogue with God. I realized that if I did not resuscitate, I would not possibly end up like my brother Eamon, who was in a wheelchair for the last 7 or 8 years of his life. I also realized that I didn't want to play God and decide when my life was going to end. I realized that if my life ended, I would get an answer to all the questions that I'd been asking God throughout the years. Over the years, I questioned why God would allow so much evil to permeate our world, if God were the God of love that we claim. But somehow, as I looked at my life, it all made sense. In hindsight, I would not have chosen any other way to live my life, And if and when my life came to an end, I would be at peace with how I had sought to carry my chair up the stairs to the veranda. Over the years, I asked God why God allows children to suffer and die with cancer. And then I became aware of the radiation and viruses that had been able to enter the bloodstream. I became aware that the nuclear fallout from Hiroshima and Nagasaki is still having its repercussions on people who weren't even born at the time of the dropping of the bombs. The fallout is still in the air, and maybe for 1,000 years before it hits the earth. And yet we continue to proliferate nuclear war. We were warned that the dangers of cell phones near our bodies could hurt us. And yet we've continued to push that aside, and everybody's carrying the omnipresent cellular phone. I asked myself, then it's not a question of why God allows evil to happen in our world. I believe it's more a case of why God calls us to love, and we choose to act in a different way. I'm aware that we've seen the Black Lives Matter marches calling to heed the systemic injustice in black and brown communities. Unfortunately, I've seen that firsthand. When I lived in an African American community, I decided to live poor. I stopped my insurance, and I went to the local clinic, dental clinic. They assigned me a young African American man. He happened to be a parishioner, and we became good friends. After multiple x-rays of my mouth, he gave his diagnosis to the doctor, the teacher, and made out his plan of action. The teacher accepted his plan of action. Months later, he said to me in frustration that his teacher had given him a failing grade for misdiagnosing the problem and for incorrectly planning the action that he took. Now, he said if the teacher had just pointed out to him where he was wrong, he could have had a better plan of action. But the teacher didn't tell him. He just let him work on this poor man. Years later, I went to a qualified doctor, but it cost me thousands of dollars to fix the problem. As I enter my 8th decade of life, I suspect that our afterlife with God will last a lot longer than our present life. It may last forever. I am sure the plan of God has an end game in sight. And hopefully we will live our lives according to the guidance of an ever-loving God. Perhaps we will even learn to live our lives according to God's plan this side of the grave. God bless you.